That's,
Yes,
well, it is a policy.
executive.
No, it
Oh, well, it
well,
is.
it's one
And that was really great kebab, man. That was really, really good.
Recording.
Okay. Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. I'd like to ask the members who are calling in by phone that don't have their names up, just their phone number, to identify themselves. No one? Thank you. Then we'll call the meeting to order. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, and can we have Mr. Saleh lead us, please? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have a quorum?
Madam President, we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So for the second time today, for some of you, you're going to hear the housekeeping remarks that are new, given the recent legislation. So we are holding this meeting in compliance with Brown Act rules relating to telephonic and video conference meetings. While some of our members are participating in person at SCAG's offices, Other members may be participating by telephone or video conference. And just as a reminder, if a member of this body is attending remotely, but is not at a noticed location on the agenda, they may observe but may not participate in any discussion or voting of this body. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Members of the public have the option to attend by telephone or video conference or at one of the remote locations noticed in the agenda. I'll provide instructions for providing public comment. But before I open the public comment period for matters that are not on the agenda, here are some housekeeping items. Detailed instructions on how to attend this meeting in person, by computer, or by phone have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. For those who are attending the meeting by phone, please press star to mute and unmute your phone. If you wish to raise your hand to be recognized to speak, please press 9. Last, to reduce background noise, please ensure that your microphone is muted when not in use. So I'll now open the public comment period, and members of the public should note that there are 3 ways to provide comments. You have the option, but are not required, to submit written comments via email to epubliccomments@scag.ca.gov. Written comments received after 5 p.m. on Wednesday, March 1st, 2023 will be announced and included as part of the official record of the meeting. Do we have any written public comments?
No written public comments, Madam President.
Thank you. Additionally, you may remotely address the Regional Council in real time and will be allowed a total of 3 minutes to speak on all items on the agenda. If you desire to speak during the public comment period on an item listed on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call the item. When the item is called, use the raised hand function on your computer or star 9 by phone and wait for SCAG staff to announce your name and phone number. Third, you may verbally address the Regional Council in person. And again, we welcome up to 3 minutes in comments for all items on the agenda. If you desire to speak in person, you are well invited, but not required to fill out and present a public comment card to the clerk of the board prior to speaking. For purposes of providing public comment for items listed on the consent calendar, please indicate that you wish to speak when the consent calendar is called. Items listed on the consent calendar will be acted upon with one motion, and there will be no separate discussion on these items unless a member of the legislative body so requests, in which event the item will be considered separately. This is the time for members of the public to offer comment for matters that are within SCAG's jurisdiction but are not listed on the agenda. If you would like to speak on an agenda item, please wait for the time to be called. Do you have any members of the public who wish to speak on non-agendized items?
Madam President, I do not see any raised hands.
Okay, then we will close the public comment period. And is there anything we're going to change in order on the agenda? No? Okay. So I want to remind everyone one more time to unmute your phone before speaking, state your name during deliberations, and whether making a motion or offering a second. For those who have joined by phone, press star 6 to mute and unmute your phone. So we'll go to our first action item, which is the Good Movement Supply Chain Resolution. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak to this issue?
Madam President, I do not see any raised hands.
Okay. And I'll turn to Komea Jise, our Executive Director, to provide introduction.
Thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon, Regional Council members. As many of you know, the SCAG region is home to the largest port complex in the country, with an extensive multimodal freight network, which includes railroads and our roads. And we're keenly aware of the importance of trade activity to our regional economy, which creates jobs in not just in logistics, but also feeds the jobs in manufacturing and other economic activities in our region. We've seen considerable disruption and volatility in freight activities. And these had been going on pre-pandemic, but the pandemic did bring this to the forefront in recent years. And these disruptions have reverberated across industries affecting both large and small businesses throughout the SCAG region. Therefore, ensuring that our transportation system can continue to meet the needs of our regional business is a critical element of the work that we do at SCAG, and especially as we feed into Connect SoCal. SCAG simultaneously faces enormous responsibility in also identifying and promoting effective policies and strategies to mitigate the attendant community impacts of the goods movement industry. As a result, the Transportation Committee presents to you and recommends to this Regional Council this resolution for adoption today. The proposed resolution acknowledges the need to update our comprehensive goods movement plan that engages with traditionally underrepresented communities, that integrates both rail and road infrastructure, that considers inland port strategies, that advances the transition to zero emissions technology, and that prioritizes community and environmental justice concerns together with economic needs and workforce development opportunities. So to provide a context, before we ask you to adopt this, to provide a context to the challenges that we see and the opportunities that we see in the goods movement and supply chain industry, we have two speakers today. And both of those speakers are well-known and really well-versed in their areas of expertise, and hopefully they'll bring some clarity to the complexity of the system that we have in a supply chain system. The first speaker is Chris Shimoda. Chris is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the California Trucking Association. And Chris has been part of, I've known Chris, I don't know, we'll date ourselves now, but I've known Chris for a long time, and I really respect his perspective, not just about trucking, but also in general across the goods movement industry. Our second speaker is no less erudite. We have Thomas Jelinek. Thomas is the Vice President at the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, and he brings also a very vast background to this. Thomas and many of us have worked at the national level with the TRB committees on intermodal freight, and so it's really good to have both Chris and Thomas here with us. So with that, we'll go to Chris first. I think Chris is online, and glad to have Thomas here in the room with us. Chris, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
There you are. Yes.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Director Ajise, for the invitation. And as was said, I'm Chris Shimoda. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the California Trucking Association. Just a little bit of background on the CTA. We're the nation's largest statewide association representing the trucking industry and part of the American Trucking Association's 50-state federation, representing about 1,000 members, ranging from some of the largest trucking fleets in the country, all the way down to single truck owner-operators, with our average member being typically a multi-generation California-based family-run company of about 20 trucks. That's really our sweet spot. And a little bit about the industry. Trucking and logistics, as you all know, is one of the largest remaining blue-collar industries in the state of California, with a majority-minority driver workforce, over 50% Latino, 6% African-American, 6% API, and has served as a pathway to the middle class for generations of Californians. It's especially important in the SCAG region, with an estimated 1 in 9 jobs in the region tied to the San Pedro Port Complex alone. And as noted in the draft resolution, a full 1 in 3 jobs in the region being tied in some way to the goods movement industry, including manufacturing, retail, agriculture, and other industries that rely upon trucks to function. And because of the importance to jobs and the economy in the SCAG region, we encourage SCAG to continue to plan for and invest in your goods movement infrastructure. including targeted capacity projects. I know it's much more difficult these days to talk about capacity, but also things like truck parking. Not as glamorous as some of the topics of the day, but to give an example, just from a data standpoint of why these traditional infrastructure concerns are still important. According to a study by the American Transportation Research Institute, SCAG continues to be home to 3 of the nation's top 10 freight bottlenecks. And according to a recent truck parking study by Caltrans, SCAG is also home to 6 of the top 10 most deficient truck parking regions around the state. A little bit on the environmental front, I know that it is an increasingly hot topic with respect to goods movement. I've been with the CTA, again, I'll date myself, for 15 years this year. Came in at the height of the adoption of a suite of regulations by the Air Resources Board impacting nearly every diesel fuel piece of equipment in the state, including our members' trucks. And so since 2008, when those rules went into effect, the industry has spent about $1 billion a year on average to upgrade to cleaner equipment. And as of January 1st, 2023, this was the final compliance deadline for what's called the California Truck and Bus Regulation. Every single truck in the state must be an EPA 2010 model year truck, which includes technologies right from the manufacturer, which in the words of the Air Resources Board, virtually eliminates diesel soot and reduces smog forming emissions by over 90%. And you are actually not allowed, as of January 1st of this year, to even register a truck with the DMV if it does not meet that model year standard. So very proud of the work that the industry has done there to help clean the air. And we're continuing to work with the Air Resources Board on further initiatives, including the nation's first smog check program for trucks. This was adopted about 1.5 years ago by the agency, is going to be in effect shortly out in the field. And that program is going to ensure that we are identifying any trucks on the road which have malfunctioning emission control systems. Those trucks, roughly 3%, which are estimated to be malfunctioning, are also estimated to contribute about half the air pollution from trucks. And so it's important that we identify those gross emitters and get them addressed. Okay, so now as we look forward to this transition to zero emissions, that's taking up a good part of my time at the moment. I do want to talk a bit about, sort of non-traditional infrastructure here, what it's going to take to really get some of these trucks on the road. So extensive planning and coordination is going to be needed to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to make this transition a success. It is not like this prior generation of regulations I just talked about, which really did not involve a ton of planning. It was just basically a cleaner diesel truck that needed some diesel exhaust fluid, and that's about it. But this is a whole different sort of challenge ahead for us. And I'll give you just a really concrete example. So 10 months from now, it's actually fewer than 10 months from now, the nation's first zero emission fleet regulation is set to go into effect. And at the San Pedro ports, what that rule is going to require is that any new truck entering the port is going to have to be zero emissions beginning January 1st, 2024. And there will be legacy trucks still servicing the ports, but any new entrant will need to be zero emissions. And what we estimate at this time is that by 2025, as many as a little bit over 2,000 trucks will need to be replaced. Diesel trucks, which are no longer going to be eligible to operate in the ports, will need to be replaced by zero emission trucks. And quite frankly, I do not expect the charging infrastructure for those trucks to be in place by 2025. and to explain a little bit of why that is. So I'm sure some of the folks on the line and in the rooms may have electric cars and familiar with the way that they work. Just want to point out that electric trucks specifically and truck charging is fundamentally different. And it's a fundamentally different challenge than what you may know about passenger car charging. So as an example, if you look at a Chevy Bolt, for instance, that car has a battery pack that is around 65 kilowatt hours. That's the size of the battery. Your Class 8 semi trucks are going to have batteries about 10 times the size of that Chevy Bolt. Unlike in the passenger car arena, where you may drive to the workplace that has a charger and you can slowly charge overnight or during the day or overnight at your home, Class 8 semis have very demanding use cases and duty cycles, and in many cases need to be continuously operated throughout the day and will have very tight time windows to be charged. And so the mix between the size of the battery and the charging speeds that are going to be needed for these trucks means that the challenges with respect to infrastructure and the electrical grid side of things are going to be massive. And another just concrete example, if anybody drives a Tesla, you may be familiar with the Tesla supercharger network. At the high end, that's a 250 kilowatt speed charger. It's going to charge even a Tesla Model X in around 15 minutes. On that same charger, the recently announced Volvo VNR electric semi-tractor would take anywhere from between 2.5 around 2.5 hours, and the recently announced Tesla Semi would likely take around 4 hours to charge. So, very different than passenger car charging. To give you an idea of what that means just from an operational standpoint for the industry, your typical diesel truck can be filled in around 10 minutes. And so it's quite the dichotomy change to go from a 10-minute fill up to a 2.5 to 4 hour every day sort of charging situation. So ideally, I'll tell you just what the industry's perspective on this broadly. There is no opposition to zero emission technology. We have members who have been in this space for over 2 decades now, trying to get technology that will work. The ideal situation is going to be mostly, let's call it class 2B through 5 trucks. That's your classic cargo Sprinter van doing e-commerce deliveries up to your UPS step van size, slowly charging overnight at a central location. Those trucks don't typically have either weight or range concerns. And if you can bring everything home to a central depot, that is significantly less taxing on the electrical grid as well. However, that is, not where state policy is headed right now. And so we're trying to figure out some pretty immense challenges. And again, just another concrete number to throw out there. The pace at which specifically DC fast chargers needs to be installed to keep up with the regulations that are being proposed by the Air Resources Board. The estimate is between now and 2035, we need to get, it's over 300 DC fast chargers in the ground every single week. Whereas the California Energy Commission estimates that the state right now is doing around 14 of these DC fast charger installs per week. So orders of magnitude more quickly, going to need to figure out a lot of the pinch points and constraints that we have along the way. For those who may not know, there was a presentation done by the Energy Commission this past summer that showed that in the Edison territory specifically, around 3/4 of the circuits on the Edison grid have zero additional capacity to integrate more electrical demand. And so that's going to necessitate a huge build out on the utility end to support the new demand, truck charging projects because of the speed of the chargers, are going to be in the multiple megawatts. The projects can take upwards of 7 to 10 years to complete because of needing to upgrade substations, transmission lines, distribution. And to return to the question of the ports, just to give you an idea of, the scale of the issue, the needed charging by 2025 is going to be on order of 200 megawatts, which in concrete terms basically means about enough power infrastructure to charge nearly 200,000 households. So it's a huge build out needed, and very quickly. We are running out of time here. 2025 is right around the corner. And a study done by the Port of Long Beach to take a look at what they could do with available land within their control said that they could do a total potential charging infrastructure of 22 megawatts. So not 200, but 22. If they use every available plot of land, and that would take roughly 10 years if they started immediately to accomplish. And so without solving these challenges, we're simply not going to be able to meet the goals on the timelines that are being set out. And so whether we're talking traditional infrastructure, which I do want to commit to you all that we're looking forward to partnering on your call to action to encourage continued investment in the region. It's extremely important for, again, less glamorous issues like truck parking and freight bottlenecks to be addressed, but also on some of these issues surrounding zero emission infrastructure. There's going to need to be a lot of collaboration in the years to come to make this happen. So just want to thank you all again for the opportunity to be with you. Looking forward to answering any of your questions. And I'll pass it back to you, Director.
Thanks, Chris. I think we'll hold the questions if you don't mind hanging on. So we'll listen to Thomas and then hopefully have both of you address questions at the end. You're up, Thomas. Thanks, Chris.
Seen it. There it goes. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, everyone. It is a pleasure. My name is Thomas Yelenich. I'm Vice President with the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. The Pacific Merchant Shipping Association is an independent trade association. We have offices in Long Beach, Oakland, and Seattle. We represent marine terminal operators and ocean carriers, both US flagged and foreign flagged vessels operating in West Coast ports. What I'd like to talk to you today is about some of the issues that are facing our industry, the challenges that I think we've all become painfully aware of over the course of the pandemic, have significant consequences for our industry, have significant consequences for our competitiveness, and raise issues in terms of what sort of investments we're going to be making in the ports, which are a vital economic engine for this region. So when we look forward, the things we see are supply chain disruptions. They have occurred. We all, whether it was toilet paper during the pandemic or simply the supply chain that feeds the businesses that work and thrive here in Southern California, we became painfully aware of how important the supply chain is. For us in this industry, most of the time people do not take notice of the ports or the supply chain. And for a period of 2 years, we felt like the supply chain and how it's connected to our everyday lives was a front page issue. And so hopefully, when coming out of this experience here, we realize the need for continued investment in our ports. The ports are critical for not just the economy, but for the jobs that they produce, the revenue they produce. They are really the lifeblood of this region and our local communities. I'm a lifelong St. Peter resident. These communities thrive or suffer based on the health of our ports. And so supply chain disruptions, market share loss, and uncertainty in the future are the issues that we're looking forward to. Before I get into those issues, one of the things I want to mention, because it really is important, and from my personal perspective, I used to be at the Port of Long Beach. I was the original author of the Long Beach's Clean Air Action Plan on that side. I ran the Clean Trucks program. The environmental impacts of the port need to be addressed, and we have been successfully addressing them. When we look at from 2005 to 2021, the latest year that data is available, diesel particulate matter is down 86%, nitrogen oxides down 46%, and sulfur oxides down 95%. These are, tremendous improvements, and they're only a step in terms of the ultimate goal of zero emissions. Like you heard from Chris, we're not opposed to zero emissions. It's a question of how we get there, the technology that's going to be deployed, and how do we finance that transition. So going back to the supply chain disruptions, what you see on the screen in front of you is the vessel queues. I think we all became familiar with the armada ships that were off our coast here during the pandemic. And that hit a high back in January of 2022, just over a year ago, with 109 vessels offshore. That posed a number of issues. From a local community perspective, it raises issues in terms of air quality, all those vessels sitting out there, but also it poses safety issues. We're concerned about having that many ships in that proximity to each other. That's, a recipe for problems. And so industry worked with PMA, and the marine exchanges of Alaska and Southern California worked together to develop a virtual queuing system that was quickly implemented. And we saw that the number of vessels offshore basically returned to baseline levels. And baseline levels, so should be zero. There should not be any container ships out there. Container ships operate what is known as a liner service. And a liner service basically is just in time. And so we don't want to see queues. It's bad for business. It's bad for the environment. We want to operate in a just-in-time mode. And that has benefits both locally in terms of moving the ships away from the shore, but also allows the vessels to slow down as they're approaching, and that saves fuel, and that reduces things like climate changing emissions. So what drove that? And you can see that, I think we're all aware during the pandemic, the shift in consumer spending. And we can see that on this graph here. And the blue line was 2020, how many vessel services we had to the West Coast here. And in 2022, you can see that just jump. And that was everything from medical supplies to meet the demands of the pandemic to consumer goods that we were all ordering on at Home Depot or Amazon. And so that rush of cargo came in and overwhelmed the system. And that had consequences for the way the system operates. What you see here is what we call dwell time. Dwell time is how long a container sits at the port. Not something most people care about, but it really is a picture of how healthy the supply chain is moving. And normally a container is in our port for less than 3 days, and that is good. During the pandemic, we saw those numbers climb and climb and climb. By 2021, it was approaching 6 days, and then by we got up to over 8 days. Over 50% of the cargo was sitting on the dock more than 5 days. And so what that means is, that means a number of things. One, the velocity of the cargo is slowing down. That means we can't unload the ships as quickly because we have nowhere to put that cargo. The terminals are full, and so we have to wait. And there were times we actually turned vessels away at the height of this because the terminal was just full, absolutely full. And one of the challenges, why does it get like this? Well, the supply chain is not the ports. The supply chain starts in Asia and ends at your front door. Not only was it the ports, the warehouses are full. We have record low vacancy in terms of warehouse space in Southern California. The railroads were full. We had incidents throughout the pandemic. You know, one of the things we saw was not just the challenges of the increased cargo volume, but disruptions that multiply those effects. You wouldn't think that a snowstorm in February in Texas would impact us, but that basically shut down rail operations moving out of the West Coast. And suddenly rail cargo could not leave our terminals. And the rail companies had to start throttling the amount of cargo they would take from our ports. Again, stranding cargo on the docks, slowing down operations, and increasing congestion. And so as we saw, and this is where competitiveness comes in, what you see here is basically congestion at different gateways, the West Coast, San Pedro Bay, and other West Coast ports. And you know, I draw your attention to the blue and the gray. As things started filling up here and congestion started increasing on the West Coast in San Pedro Bay, you saw that cargo moving to the East Coast. And the congestion followed it. This was a national issue, but it's also a competitive issue for us locally. That was cargo volumes that we lost. That means that's jobs that we lost. Some of the best paying jobs in the country, longshore jobs, and all the jobs that are supported throughout the supply chain here. So, you know, beyond the ports, we have the warehouses, we have the rail network, and we have trucking capacity issues, particularly as a result of the regulatory uncertainty I think we're facing. You heard Chris talk about the regulatory challenges we have ahead of us. For the first time ever, the San Pedro Bay ports will have a segregated truck fleet from the rest of the California truck fleet. We have never operated in that manner before. We don't know what that means for our capacity or ability to move cargo off the docks come 2024. That raises lots of issues. I ran the original Clean Trucks program when I was at the Port of Long Beach. The thing that made the Clean Trucks program such a success, and I'm sorry to say, was the Great Recession. Cargo volumes declined. The capacity issues that are imposed by the transition did not materialize, and so we had the capacity to move through. I'm concerned that in order to get through the next regulatory transition, we will need a recession or we will face chaos. And that's something that we need to collectively think about in terms of the infrastructure we need to support a zero emissions transition and the deployment of these trucks to provide the capacity. And, you know, the competitive issues are not a thing just of the pandemic. This is a long-term issue. We have been underperforming other ports in the nation for a long time. Savannah, far and away, is blowing us away. There since 2006, and I picked 2006 since that was the year we adopted the Clean Air Action Plan, they've grown 173%. We've grown in San Pedro Bay 21%. And it's not just a issue between different baselines. New York and New Jersey, which is now unfortunately the #2 port in the country, has grown 86%. You know, so we have big ports growing much faster than we are. And again, cargo volumes mean jobs. I'm the son of a longshoreman. That cargo means jobs that were lost, longshoremen we could have had here. And, you know, we saw a brief reversal of the trend during the pandemic. Things went up a little bit, but as soon as the pressure of the pandemic, trying to get it, you know, we have an advantage here. We are the closest port to Asia. And so we are the place people should want to send their cargo because we are close in terms of sailing distance, and we have fantastic rail connections to the rest of the country. But as soon as the pressure of getting the cargo into the US started abating as we came out of the pandemic, cargo continued moving to the East Coast, and we saw that decline accelerate. And we see that in the prices. We all heard about the insanity of what it took to get cargo from Asia to the US during the pandemic. Now we're at or below pre-pandemic levels. Year-over-year change was down 76% to move a container from Shanghai to Los Angeles. And, again, I think the history of this is important. So, I'm going to keep coming back to the history here. We were planning for big things. When I was at the Port of Long Beach, we had a lot of projects, and those projects are mostly completed. And, so when we forecasted the future, the ports did a forecast in 2007, and that's the red ticks are the actual cargo volumes, and the 2007 forecast on this slide is shown by the blue line. Of course, the Great Recession hit, didn't turn out that way. So a new forecast was done in 2009. So we aimed for that. And then we started underperforming that forecast. So a new forecast was done in 2016, and sort of like to improve the chances of getting it right, there was high, mid, and low growth scenarios, and each one of those was bounded with an upper and lower bound. And so what you see on the slide is the upper bound of the high forecast and the lower bound of the low forecast, along with the mid. We are now below the lower bound of the low forecast. And so again, lost opportunity we're facing here. And 2022 was a difficult end. Last year, San Pedro Bay ports were down 5.1% compared to 2021, which was a record year, but still down 5.1%. Port of Long Beach, end of the year, is the #3 port. New York, New Jersey, for the first time in 30 years, is the #2 port in the country. I was in high school. January this year is off to a bad start as well. January year-over-year numbers down 22%. And so that gets us to what should we be doing about it? Probably first and foremost, and I think the point of today's discussion, we need investment. Trouble is we're not getting it from a lot of sources. At the federal level, East Coast and Gulf Coast ports are getting the federal dollars. As you can see here, $11 billion for East and Gulf Coast ports compared to $1 billion to West Coast to San Pedro Bay ports. That's a travesty. And some of you may know of the issues surrounding the harbor maintenance tax. That's basically San Pedro Bay ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach, funding the development of our competitors on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. And so, we largely feel we're ignored by the feds, and we also feel we're ignored by the state as well. There are states like Texas and Florida actively promote their ports at a state level. They send delegations to other states, to California, to capture cargo owners and bring them to move cargo through their states because of the economic benefit of having strong, vital ports. We don't have programs here in this state that really center our ports in terms of investment and in terms of I don't want to even say gaining market share, maintaining our market share at this point. And so I think this is really important that we think about what we're doing as a region and as a state, because we have great leaders at the Port of Los Angeles. We have great leaders at the Port of Long Beach. We need the help of agencies like this. We need help of agencies like the state of California to the very top to ensure that we remain competitive through infrastructure investment and other tools that will improve our competitiveness. And sadly, when we look at on the horizon, there are no meaningful infrastructure projects coming forward. When I was at the port, Middle Harbor was on the books, Pier B Rail Yard, the Gerald Desmond Bridge replacement, all of those things are coming to the end of their investment cycle. and we need to begin the next investment cycle soon. And so, I think one of the concerns is shippers look at this, they see uncertainty, they're not seeing investment, they see increasing costs. The executive director of the Port of Los Angeles was on Squawk Box last week talking about how we are the most expensive gateway in the country. We need to do things to improve our competitiveness. And then, of course, when you look at the regulatory uncertainty we're facing, we need a way to address that as well. People need to have confidence when they move the when they bring the cargo to Southern California, we can move it efficiently, cost effectively, and that we will have the capacity to do so. So with that, thank you very much, and be happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any comments or question? And again, I'll start in the room and then go to Zoom. And I see Margaret Finlay with her card up.
Thank you. Fascinating, really good information. What can we as local and regional leaders do? It sounds like we're talking about the feds. We aren't getting any help from the feds, nothing from the state. What can we do as local elected officials?
Well, I think depending on where you are in the region, we all need to look at what part our area plays in the supply chain and support it. We see places, not just here, but throughout the state, of disinvestment from industrial facilities. We certainly need to mitigate impacts of industrial operations, but to use Port of Oakland as an example, they're taking one of the few parcels of industrial waterfront land, Howard Terminal, and they're proposing to turn it into a baseball stadium. If it becomes a baseball stadium, it will never be a marine terminal again. And that is a loss not just for the Port of Oakland, that's a loss for the state of California, the agricultural exporters in the Central Valley. That's one example of how, as a state, we're pursuing deindustrialization. And so, people don't like the idea of industrial parcels, but it's our supply chain. It's what makes our daily lives work. As I know CTA likes to say, whatever you have probably arrived on a truck. And so we need to figure out in our own communities, how do we have a meaningful industrial policy that reflects our community, but also reflects the needs we have as well. That's the challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCalnick, did I get that right? Yeah.
Thank you.
McCalnick.
I had a question regarding automation. What role has automation played in either improving or hindering the competitiveness of our ports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That, automation is a tool. And, when we look at among our members at PMSA, it's not a universal tool. Some believe that is the way to pursue it and to be competitive. And we see examples of that in terms of Long Beach Container Terminal, the greenest terminal probably in the world. And quickly moving to full zero emissions. Almost every piece of cargo handling equipment is essentially automated and zero emissions there. It was a difficult project. I was actually at the permit desk in 2003, and I took the permit application to do that. That project finished last year. So that's a 20-year horizon and billions of dollars. It's hard. Other folks, PMSA members, are not interested in pursuing automation. They think there are other solutions, and we're going to find out which one's right or wrong. We don't know, and through their own competition, they will bear it out.
Chris, do you have a response to the question as well?
The earlier one as well. What can we do?
Yeah, I'll start with the automation question. on the trucking side, it's a little different than terminal equipment, where we're likely years away from really seeing fully automated trucks in any kind of actual operation in the state of California. And I always like to say, if 21-year-old got their commercial driver's license today, the likelihood that they're going to lose their job to an automated truck is pretty low. That's what we're really talking about in terms of transition. And with respect to what local electeds can do, I think this call to action is a great example of something positive, where a lot of times we talk about goods movement with respect to the issues or problems it may cause, as opposed to the benefits that it brings. As an example, I always like to point back to some other states when they did their freight action plans as part of the original funding mechanism at the feds for freight funding. States were required to do these action plans. And we saw other states that really focused on what are the economic sectors that we want to support in our state. In the case of Minnesota, it was the soybean industry, and they basically mapped out investments to get their agricultural producers to their markets. And that's the way that they talked about goods movement with respect to jobs and the economy. And so the more focus that there can be, I mean, the environmental mitigations are going to happen. I can guarantee you that. But I do think our policy is starting to catch up with us a bit. Thomas was referring to market share loss. There's a CNBC poll out there that was done about shippers who have moved their business to the East Coast, and some of that business is not going to come back. And they asked why. And there were some major California policy issues that were cited by those shippers. And I think when you see proposals like I'm dealing with in the legislature this year to ban all diesel trucks by 2030 in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, which is going to jeopardize 400,000 blue collar jobs in those counties, that does send a message to Thomas's members, customers, who they can vote with their dollars by sending them to other areas of the country, and they're starting to do so, unfortunately.
Thank you. And I want to assure the people on Zoom that I do see your hands up. I just want to go through the room here first, and then we'll go. And I see, is that Steve Ties or, okay.
A couple of slides back, you talked about, the
Gerald
Desmond Bridge, improvements in Long Beach and so on. So when we look at that slide that talks about $11 billion investment in New York, New Jersey, and only $1 billion here, when we put those programs on the docket, was it 11 billion here and only $1 billion there? Does that all work out? Do you know what I'm saying?
That slide refers to federal dollars.
Okay.
And so, yeah, $11 billion went to Gulf Coast and East Coast ports.
Right.
1 billion came here.
I understand,
Yeah.
but when we were doing the improvements you were
Mhm.
referring to, was the Gulf Coast and the East Coast saying, wow, look at all the money they're getting?
No, because they were getting tons of money themselves. They had projects like Bayonne Bridge.
At the same time.
At the same time,
same
channel deepenings. The East Coast, over the past 10 years, the East Coast ports have transformed themselves rapidly and at a speed that we have not been able to match in terms of accepting larger ships. Luckily, we have natural advantages. We are a natural deep water port. The East Coast ports, because the river ports, are not. So they have to dredge and actually blast their way to deeper water. They had bridges that they had to physically raise, not replace, but they actually lifted the whole bridge up in order to permit these larger ships. And they did it. And, you see this in places like Savannah, New York, New Jersey, Houston. Houston is, sort of an amazing thing from a navigation standpoint. The Gulf waters there near the coast aren't deep enough to take these ships. They have a trench in the water that the vessels have to navigate to get to the port. And that is where federal dollars are going to. And directly competing with us there. So there is lots of things going on there, and it's all specifically to compete with us.
Well, I would agree with what Mr. Shimoda said, and if we don't take it to Sacramento and tell them that what they're proposing for 2025 or 2030 and beyond, and the damage it will do to our communities and the areas that you guys are serving. You said likely if you got a package, it came on a truck. Well, it went from ship to the truck. So if we don't push back, and I think it was SB5, if I'm not wrong, that changed contractors into employees, where are those people going to go? They're not going to be in California. They're going to go to the Gulf Coast. So I hope it's on your agenda to make sure Sacramento knows what bad news they're delivering.
We're trying to carry that message.
Okay, and Chris, on any of these questions that come up, if you have something you'd like to add, please feel free to do so. I see, is that Karen Spiegel's? Okay, please. And you'll need a microphone.
I think what Chris just mentioned is something that leads to a bigger picture, and that is we need to work together in advocacy on these legislation. Just because it's Riverside and San Bernardino counties doesn't mean it doesn't affect everybody. By just the philosophy of picking out 2 counties of by 2030 and making it all diesel is beyond my ability to fathom. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And I realize we have a higher than some areas, but even LA has a higher smog area. But the fact that they're doing that, or there's an attempt to do it, means we have to take a unified vote or a voice and let them know the effects it's going to have on Southern California. Exactly. And we have to look at the wholeness of it, whatever the legislation is. And so I think I haven't seen in all my years in SCAG that we've really worked together on legislation that's bad for our area. And I think we really need to start doing that, whether it's just letter writing campaigns, calls, or whatever. But until we step up and get the voice, our voters won't either. So we have to lead by example.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, was that Cindy Allen? Please.
Yes, thank you. That was my question. So thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go down to Oscar Ortiz. Oh, no, we won't. We'll go to Deborah.
Thank you, Oscar. And thank you, Madam President. I had 2 questions that I wanted to know. I believe I have the mic on. Did you want, if I had questions on our report and comments, do you want me to hold those until we actually talk about the resolution and information? Or do I add it now along with my comments that I would like to?
Please, yeah, I think wait until the resolution is a good idea.
Okay, good. So then just to you, Thomas, right? Thank you. I wanted to say the material you provided and your presentation is good presentation. A couple of things to the point that some have said about the story we need to tell. And I made note here, of course, we've been ignored by the feds or whatever, but also starting at the state. When I looked at this report, what I didn't see, and it's something tied to our resolution and things, is you haven't provided a chart for me, I can't speak for others, that also would show the loss of jobs. We need to bring it back to not just, because later in our resolution, we talk about equity, we talk about the disadvantaged communities, we're going to talk about impacts. I'm in the community where the community in the county she speaks of, San Bernardino, where people feel we're the only ones that are being impacted by this horrible industry. That is not the case. And I think it helps us if we help bring home not only the relationship of the jobs lost, which I went through this whole program thinking, well, let me see where it is. And I just wanted to make a personal note that there was a time when in the Port of Los Angeles, where we actively did recruit and were able to get those shipping container owners to come and see what was about how magnificent the Port of LA was and Long Beach. And we're losing that, I see. But I wanted to add that point that we need to talk about that, and we need to be able to take that back to Sacramento, because I'm looking at other legislation on the business side for California state, and we're focusing on jobs. And we're also focusing on business opportunities for small business, minority-owned business. We're also focusing on looking at how does it play out in equity. I don't want to just have another equity plan. I want to make sure that whatever we're supporting in legislation, not on the regional council, but to what Ms. Spiegel said, we have to tie it back to how does it relate to us, not only in LA County, but Riverside and San Bernardino County. So, and I'll wait for my other comments there.
Thank you. And we'll go, Oscar, please.
Thank you. My question was, because I'm looking at some of the issues that you're mentioning, whether it's the charging or the grid investments that are needed to keep up with the electrical trucks, what is keeping the hydrogen trucks behind in this conversation?
So great question, and it's similar issue of infrastructure, and similar to the light duty market, hydrogen just seems to be trailing the battery electric technology. We're eventually going to have hydrogen for certain applications due to the fact that the fill times are closer to 15 to 30 minutes. That's going to prevent our drivers from having to sit there for 4+ hours to charge. The distribution is significantly easier. I saw that the Air Resources Board estimates you can do something like 80,000 trucks with 200 hydrogen stations. So instead of having to do a doubling potentially of the supply and generation for electricity, some of these more intense uses, longer haul Class 8 trucks, you're going to have to eventually turn to hydrogen, but it's just a ways out at this point.
Thank you. And I think for us here, I would really like us to keep in mind, the investments that are needed for those grid improvements and everything, and just try to build a clear comparison of long-term investment and what we're going to get for our money, because my concern is that the hydrogen in the long term is going to be actually a better investment here, but we're not really able to clearly see that with the numbers that we're looking at now.
Thank you. We'll go to Margaret Clark next.
Yes, this has been a huge eye opener for me, because I assumed that all these regulations were countrywide, our whole nation. And if they're squeezing us and everything's moving over to other areas, you didn't save the planet. You just made it worse, because everything's going to move there and they're not going to be as stringent. So it's going to be actually worse. Help us lobby for this, because I agree with Karen Spiegel and everybody. This is huge.
If I can make this comment at this point, because we are hearing a lot of the same theme about how can we help, and that's our question. How can we help? So we really appreciate the presentation today, because it's got us thinking, and it is the impetus for us coming together to have a voice to help you. So yes, this resolution we know helps, but that's just a little bit of what we need to do. So as you go forward with any initiatives, please let us know how we can write a letter or speak up for you or talk about it in one of our ledge visits. We would really appreciate that. So I just wanted to touch on that, because I hear that theme coming up a lot.
And just to comment on that real quickly, we actually do have what we call a greenhouse gas routing study. We analyzed what the greenhouse gas impacts would be as a result of diversion, and in almost every single instance, if cargo owners avoid California ports, they are increasing their greenhouse gas footprint. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. So
that would be great information for us to have. Okay, let's go to Clint Lorimar.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you to both the presenters today. Appreciate it. Very insightful presentations, helpful. And I heard both of you talk about being good with not having issues with zero emissions policies that are coming down the pike, but the same time mentioning we don't have the infrastructure in place to support this. So we need these goods to continue to move, to come into our economy, get out to the rest of the US as well. Why are you guys great with zero emissions if our reality doesn't allow us to be able to meet that?
Can Chris answer to start with that, please? I think.
And I have a follow-up.
Thank you very much.
No, absolutely. And it is complicated in the sense that there are specific use cases, as I had mentioned, that in the near term are going to accommodate the technology. It's really in that final mile delivery space. You need to have vehicles that return to a home base, have overnight to charge. Range and weight can't be an issue because, for instance, on our Class 8 semis, we're going to lose roughly 8,000 pounds in cargo payload due to the weight of the batteries. And so specific use cases that are ready to go, the industry is ready to partner with the state to make that happen. Where we run into problems with our air quality regulators is the difference of opinion of what is ready to go. There are just certain use cases which are too demanding for the zero emission technologies that we have today. And so we're still trying to have those discussions with folks like the Air Resources Board to have a meeting of the minds on where can this stuff be successful. We only have fewer than 500 zero emission trucks on the road today. If we could do something together that resulted in tens of thousands of zero emission trucks actually operating in real businesses, making real money, eventually, hopefully off of government subsidies, that is the pathway to a truly sustainable zero emission future, not one that's, propped up by government subsidies, doing just incredible economic damage and damage to, the third of the jobs that are goods movement dependent in SCAG. That's what we're trying to avoid. So it's a little bit complicated because some things are ready to go, others are not. So that's really where our disagreement is. It's timeline and feasibility.
From a maritime perspective, the answer might be even a little more complicated. When it comes to replacing equipment on a one-for-one basis, there is currently 0 pieces that are ready for deployment today. There are excellent studies that are produced by the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach that are available for review. At the same time, we recognize that we have to address climate change, so we need to be moving in that direction. That's why there are over 100 pieces of demonstration equipment that are deployed just in San Pedro Bay, testing different types of applications from different manufacturers to try and get us there. Today, the only proven zero emissions technology that's available to us is full automation. We see that it's successful, it works. It's very expensive, it takes a long time, and it is politically fraught. In fact, the state of California, in all of its investment schemes, has said that no incentive funding to get to zero emissions can be spent on equipment that is either automated or can be automated. So that the state has essentially locked the ports out of any incentive money to get to zero emissions, and so we have a long road ahead of us to get there, but we know we need to get there.
Wow, that was really eye-opening right there.
Right?
Yes.
May I ask a follow-up?
Go.
Okay. And so I must admit that usually I like to say, oh, this great information. It's depressing. I'm sorry. It really is. And the thought that occurred to me, it's not only depressing, it angers me because I would like the answer to this question. I don't know if you have it, but how much money have we spent in the region in order to meet these regulatory requirements in order to just lose business? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head. We estimated, I think we estimated that the port's estimate to get to zero emissions might be something on the order of $14 billion. We had a problem with that because we believe they underestimated that number. And that's to get to the future. We have some numbers on what we've spent in the past. It's also in the billions, but I don't recall what it is off the top of my head.
Okay, can we go to Larry McCallum, please?
Thank you, Madam President. Since I'm on the Air Quality Management District Board, my impression of the biggest impact on the supply chain has to do not with the state legislature, but with CARB and the South Coast Air Quality Management District regulations. Is that true?
I am deeply concerned about the regulatory policies. I think they create significant uncertainty in terms of the ability of industry to make it. That creates uncertainty on this question of cargo owners. And then there are ways that are being proposed. There is a container tax bill that's being floated right now that's been proposed by South Coast staff. We're deeply concerned about something like that. You know, in a time of declining market share, we don't want to accelerate that with a potential $2 billion tax on Southern California ports.
So going along with what Karen Spiegel was saying, our efforts not necessarily should be with the legislature, but should be with the regulatory agencies like CARB and the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Those are the ones that are putting in the regulations that affect you directly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and Mayor McCallum, great to hear from you. And you know, I've been doing this again for 15 years, and I'll say at the beginning of this journey, we definitely had some major environmental mitigations to get through. And you know, with $1 billion a year in investment, we virtually eliminated diesel soot, reduced smog forming emissions by 90+%. But the odd thing that happened is as the air has gotten cleaner, the regulations have actually gotten more stringent. And so that is definitely sending a message. I can tell you that in addition to some of the policies cited by the shippers who are diverting cargo, they look at the possibility of not being able to move cargo post 2025 in the San Pedro ports if we can't get those zero emission trucks in place in time, which I can confidently say we will not. That definitely sends a message again. And so, yeah, the environmental issues, there's definitely a pathway to make progress towards zero emissions in a way that is not going to scare off, you know, business to other places around the country. And we just need to work together to find that middle ground.
Our timelines are not realistic, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And before we move to our virtual, we have Lucy.
Thank you, Madam President. Just, I was going to do a little bit of this reporting in my report, but it seems to connect well with this conversation that business leaders from up and down the state just this week met with Leanne Randolph from CARB for a very candid discussion on this. And we literally asked her, what keeps you up at night? And she says three things: infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. We do not have it to meet the goals, and she even knows it. And even talking hydrogen, because the business community firmly believes you cannot have a one energy source system. You have to have other energy sources. She even talked about the fact that, well, yeah, we're looking at hydrogen, but we look at hydrogen possibly as a way to make electricity, not as a separate energy source. So it really is fascinating to see the thinking of this. It's an all electric future. And yet some states, we heard from one of our industry sectors, some states are literally watching California, and they're changing their state constitution to prohibit their state from doing what we're doing because we put our people at risk for energy and for being able to, you know, keep the lights on. So I just share with you that from the resolution, to connect the dots here, the goods movement is hugely important to the business community. If you cannot move people and goods, you cannot do business in this state. We've already lost 500,000 people to other states without our regulations. And, you know, and one of our members says it's going to grow to 1 million people.
Losing people to other states is not a greenhouse gas reduction strategy. Let me just say that again, right? Losing people to other states is not a greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So from the business community's perspective, know that we urge you to do good work in goods movement. We're here to assist you in that regard, from manufacturing to housing to retailers. Literally, Northern California to Southern California sitting in the room. We think she heard us, the chair heard us, but they're very siloed because it's a single focus thing where climate change is all. And this is a very complex world. So I love that the fact that SCAG, not one business leader said, we oppose your goals. Not one. Every one of us said, no, we want to meet the goals, but let's be realistic. So for the record, we urge your support in the resolution, and from the business community's perspective, and from the Global Land Use and Economics Council, GLUE Council's perspective, we would love to continue to engage and dialogue on that one to make it as robust, from legislative support, whatever you need, to make it realistic, because I think we're now second to New Jersey. I mean, we used to be the first in the world, right, on our ports. We've now dropped to being under New Jersey.
We're number one. Well, LA is number one.
Yes.
New York, New Jersey is number two.
Yes.
First time in 30 years.
First time in 30 years.
Long Beach is number 3.
This is crazy making, people, when we're
Yeah.
the closest to Asia. Anyway, sorry, I feel passionate about this, as you can tell.
We can.
Thank you. I will turn my mic off.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Art Brown, please.
This is for Mr. Shimoda. You said earlier that the bread and butter of your agency was the 10 truck owners?
20 more, correct.
20 more? What's that going to do then when they have to buy electric vehicles instead of diesel, that the cost of diesel or cost of electric vehicles? Is that going to start putting people out of business?
You know, I'll answer this way, that we do have members all the way up to the largest businesses in the country. And at this point in time, I don't have a single member who can really figure out how to transition to zero emissions on the timelines that are being set out. Your typical family-run 20-truck operation, they're going to really struggle to figure out even where to begin on these things. And I held a panel with a couple of experts from the utility space and a consulting side, where I even had some of our 200 and 300 truck member companies saying, we haven't even looked into this at all. We need a lot of help. And so the likelihood that you are going to see job loss of businesses, if we don't figure out a pathway forward on this, is very high.
Thank you. Hilda Solis, Supervisor Solis, was also on the call. She sent some message. She had to leave the call. She did send some message. Can you read that into the record, please?
Firstly, I want to highlight the significant investments in freight capacity and efficiency Los Angeles County and California have made. Along the 710 South Corridor, we are investing $730 million to support efficient and green goods movement. From the state, last year, our San Pedro Ports complex secured 70% of $1.2 billion funding available statewide. Secondly, I wanted to highlight the need to explicitly identify the need to plan for freight rail system investments that protect human and environmental health as part of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to Casey McKeon.
Yeah, can you just provide a little bit more detail as to why the federal government is giving more money to the other ports and not ours?
I don't know that I can answer that question, other than East Coast is typically favored over West Coast, you know, the close to the halls of power, I suppose. But
by a factor of 10 to 1, I mean, that seems ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And you know, one of the problems is the harbor maintenance tax. The harbor maintenance tax is constructed in a way that favors projects that occur in East Coast ports. And for most of its existence, the money that funded the Harbor Maintenance Fund came from West Coast ports. So the money came from Southern California and was used on the East Coast because of the way it's been constructed. People have talked about amending the harbor maintenance tax to make improvements so that we can claim a greater share of it. Unsurprisingly, other folks in other parts of the country do not support such a change.
If I can just add to that, because I think it's important to keep in mind, we have the volumes that would accrue those taxes higher than anywhere else in the country. But the types of projects, because of the natural deep-seated port that we have, we don't have the kind of projects that they're using the money for. And that's what's being funded on the East Coast. I would also add that we only have 2 senators in California. And on the East Coast, there are a number of states that gather together, and they might have 12, 15, maybe 16 or 18 senators that are asking for those monies. So that would account for why there might be that lopsidedness in funding.
Okay, can we go to James Gaisley, please?
Yes, I'll be brief. I have family members that are longshore workers, and I'm very concerned about jobs. The casuals don't get any work at all right now. I worked part-time there as a few years, and I know there's costs that the city of LA, I don't know if Long Beach does too, but maybe you can have some information about the taxes on each container that increases the cost. And also the automated ports, WCT is getting faster. I think it's Tray Pack. I've been down there, and the truckers will wait for hours to pick up their cargo. And the non-automated terminals can move cargo a lot faster. Correct?
Yeah, the Long Beach Container Terminal has the fastest turn time of any facility. That is an advantage. And speaking with my trucking colleagues, I know that they generally like the automated facilities because of how the service it can provide them. So absolutely true. And even with automation, LBCT is a fully automated terminal. Since they became automated, their payroll is expanded in terms of the number of longshoremen they employ. It's just different jobs.
Thank you. And
okay,
when
it comes to electric vehicles, how are they going to charge them? They run them.
We have 2 more people in the queue, and in order to wrap this up so that we can get everything done while we have a quorum, I'm going to go to the SCAG Riverside office.
I think that's us. Hi, this is Mayor Patricia Dawson from the city of Riverside. This is a really simplistic question, but I don't think I heard the answer to it. What would you do with billions of dollars of federal funding to increase competitiveness at the ports here in California? I'm just curious if the money did come in, would that even help because of some of the other issues that have come up? I'm just wondering.
Well, we have a problem in California in general in terms of how we deliver projects, but things that come to mind, the 710, that has been a project that has gone nowhere for my entire career and is still going nowhere. There are rail improvements that can be done throughout the port and region to provide additional rail capacity. There is, in order to support the transition to zero emissions and how expensive it is, we need, as you heard from Chris, infrastructure everywhere. We have billions and billions of dollars in needs. There's plenty that can be identified. Our biggest problem is our ability, well, one, the money is obviously first and foremost, but we also have a problem when it comes to delivering infrastructure.
And very quickly too, just to follow up on that, I'm a big believer in the power of businesses to be agile and responsive and rise to challenges. But I'm curious, if we have so many things that are attractive about our port, naturally with the deep water and that sort of thing, how much comes in from private investment, or is that an attractive option for companies that want to use this port? If it's in, can there be some public-private partnership for some of those improvements.
When we talk about dollars, I'm talking about things on, the network that, whether it's the electrical network, the rail network, the road network, those are things that I think we should be collectively improving. When you talk about private investment, everything you see in the port is ultimately funded through private financing. The ports lease the property to these terminal operators. Terminal operators pay the port billions of dollars over the term of the lease. It's the most expensive real estate in California, and so it's all essentially privately financed, from the terminal operators who build the vessel operators who build the cargo owners. Ultimately, it is the cargo owner, the shipper, who pays for all the investments in the port complex. But we have, a collective need in terms of improving the resiliency of our supply chain in California, where I think we can collectively act.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
have
That
one more
helps me understand.
Okay, we have one more comment, and that's David Shapiro. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. David Shapiro, Mayor of Calabasas, and thank you for the presentation. The advantage of guests going last is I get to hear all my brilliant colleagues make their comments and say I agree with a lot of them and support them. In my day job, my background, I represented mid to small size, including owner-operator trucking companies for about a dozen years. So have a lot of familiarity with the struggles and the concerns, especially Chris brought up early on with the transition that is going to be required. And I do want to make certain that we do what we can in addition to the resolution and everything else to help our ports and help our economy and help individuals, that we make certain that we are protecting those who might otherwise be most affected and unfairly in this situation, as Chris described. So I'm going to cut my comments short. Thank you, and support and move the resolution, if I may, Madam President.
Second.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do is take it with some of the consent because for time reasons, but I'll go to Kome Ajise at this time.
Thank you, Madam President. And I again want to thank both Chris and Thomas for their presentations and spending the time with us. I know Chris is pressed for time and he hung in there anyway. On item 2, we're asking your approval on the fiscal year 23-24 budget to go to circulation and also approve the general fund. Cindy will take us through the presentation real quickly. I just want to make some headline notes of the budget. It's by far the largest budget SCAG has ever seen, and I would estimate that it might be the largest budget SCAG will ever see because of the nature of the one-time state investment that we're dealing with. What's critical is there's about $238 million in REAP 2.0 funds that come through the budget, and 231 million of that is going directly to our member agencies. And you'll hear Cindy talk about that again in her presentation. The other note on the budget is that it covers a really broad variety of programs, about 33 programs, which is also the largest that we've had to deal with. While the monies are concentrated in 4 programs, this is really by far the largest scope in terms of work that we are seeing at SCAG. And so with that, I'm going to let Cindy run through the budget presentation.
Thank you and good afternoon. Cindy Giraldo, Chief Financial Officer. Yesterday, the fiscal year 24 budget was presented to the Executive Administration Committee. I'm very pleased to say that it did receive unanimous support. The proposed budget provides funding to address regional challenges, including transportation, good movement, which we've clearly had a lot of conversation about today, housing, equity, the digital divide, air quality, among others. As shown in Table 1 of the staff report provided, the budget totals just under $349 million, which is up nearly 133% from the current fiscal year. This increase is attributable to the full funding of REAP 2.0 programs, which totals just over $238 million. On the expenditure side, the largest component of the budget is the overall work program, which totals just under $341 million. The funding of the overall work program, as Kome mentioned, is spread across 33 different agency programs. Within the staff report on page 37 of your agenda packet, A chart has been provided that details the total budget for each of these programs within the overall work program and within the comprehensive budget document starting on page 65 of your agenda packet. You can find narratives of each program that describes the objectives and how each one aligns with our strategic plan. Most major cost components of the budget include salaries and benefits for our employees, which totals $45.2 million. There is over $231 million of direct technical assistance and pass-through payments for agencies throughout our region to support the important work done by these agencies. And $38.6 million of the consultant budget will be predominantly used to support the development, outreach, and implementation of Connect SoCal. As mentioned, our total salaries and benefit costs amount to $45.2 million, which is an $8.3 million increase over the current year. This increase can be predominantly attributed to the full year funding of the limited term staff brought on in support of REAP 2.0, the addition of 7 new permanent positions offset by the net decrease of 2 limited term positions, projected staff merit increases, the cost of implementing phase 2 of the class and compensation study, which includes changes in employee benefits. Attachment 2 of the staff report provides details of the position changes incorporated in the proposed budget. As was done yesterday at the Executive Administration Committee meeting, I would like to point out a correction on attachment 2, which incorrectly labels the HR position as an HR analyst 2. It should have been noted as a senior HR analyst with a cost impact of an additional $15,000 per year. The proposed budget also includes $1.1 million in employee benefit enhancements. This cost is offset by a reduction in the budget for vacation cash out requests, as well as the transit reimbursement program for a net budget impact of $655,000. Attachment 3 of the staff report outlines in detail the proposed benefit changes, which includes an increase in the employer contribution for employee health benefits, the introduction of an employee 457 match for non-management employees of 50% up to $1,500 annually per employee, an increase in the employee monthly technology allowance from 110 to 140, new fertility care coverage, the option of pet insurance at no cost to SCAG, and the permanent implementation of the current vacation cash out pilot program. To conclude my summary of the budget, I'll note that the general fund revenues include membership dues of approximately $2.5 million. The detailed breakdown of the membership dues by agency has been provided in the comprehensive budget document. And it was compiled and calculated in accordance with SCAG's bylaws. With that, staff recommends that the Regional Council move to support the draft comprehensive budget in the amount of $349 million, including the general fund budget and membership assessment, which will be transmitted to the General Assembly, and authorize the release of the budget information to begin our 30-day public comment period. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? And I see Karen Spiegel.
I'm just trying to figure on the staff amount, the future labor, and it talks about elsewhere for the future budget. Future meaning at what point?
I'm sorry, what specific section are you referring to?
It's several places in here. When you look at the budget line items, it says miscellaneous labor future, and it's talking about future budget. It's listed several places because it's $12 million and almost 13. And I find that kind of high for, and what is future?
Sure. So the way that it varies, but I'll give you a good example with REAP 2.0, which has a multi-year timeline for implementation. So we're programming the entire $238 million. It's not going to be expended in all of fiscal year 24. So we have to plan for the labor that will be expended in those future years.
Okay, so the money that we're going to receive, quote, in this year is spread out over future budgets.
That's correct.
That's an unusual way of doing it. And $196 million for consultants?
The $196 million is actually technical assistance and pass-through payments that will go to funding agencies. The majority of that is funding that's being provided through REAP 2.0.
Okay.
So the PATH program, for example.
Just you use different terminology each time you look in the different pages here in the budget, and so it was very confusing.
Okay.
It's not consistent in, you know, is this purple? But well, in one place it's one color of purple, another color, and so it was very hard to follow.
Okay, well, thank you for that comment. We'll definitely take a look at that.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? And I see none. So at,
For Sarah from the city of Victorville, I motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Second,
okay,
Bucknam.
okay, hold on just a moment here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take items 1 through 12. And I'd like you to note on the consent calendar, we're going to request to correct the minutes and reflect attendance by Regional Council Member Steve Ty at the February 2nd RC meeting. Also, please include in that motion the HR analyst fix that you heard about in the budget. And so does that, Bucknam,
Yes.
is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Motion still stands as your recommendation.
Okay, we need a second. Now, one other thing is we have to ask for, is there any public comment on items 1 through 13? 1 through 12. And I see none. You see any? No? Okay. So can we have a roll call vote as presented for items 1 through 12? And I do want to say we appreciate all the conversation regarding the goods movement supports, and I obviously with great passion we support that. We heard that pretty loudly and clearly. So can we have a roll call vote, please?
Madam President, I just want to confirm the motion was made by Becerra, seconded by Bucknam.
Is that accurate?
That is correct from Bucknam.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cindy Allen,
Aye.
Elizabeth Becerra,
Aye.
Gary Boyer,
Yes.
Art Brown,
Aye.
Wendy Bucknam,
Aye.
Margaret Clark, Jenny Crosswhite,
Aye.
Steve DeRoos, Keith Ike,
Yes.
Margaret Finley,
Yes.
James Gaisley,
Aye.
Jan Harnick,
Yes.
Mark Henderson,
Yes.
Laura Hernandez, Mike Judge,
Yes.
Joe Kalmick,
Yes.
Trish Kelly, Kathleen Kelly,
Yes.
Tammy Kim,
Yes.
Laura Clayman, Linda
Yes.
Krupa. Thank you.
Yes.
Linda Krupa, thank you.
Yes.
Locke Dawson,
Aye.
Patricia Locke Dawson, thank you. Vianney Lopez,
Yes.
Clint Lorimore,
Aye.
Ken Mann,
Yes.
Steve Manos,
Yes.
Ray Marquez,
Yes.
Andrew Maciel, Larry McCallan,
Yes.
Casey McKeon,
Aye.
Marsha McLean, Lauren Meister,
Yes.
Maria Nava Frolic,
Yes.
Frank Navarro,
Yes.
Oscar Ortiz,
Yes.
Rocky Rhodes,
Yes.
Deborah Robertson. Thank you.
Yes.
Ali Saleh,
Yes.
Tim Sandoval,
Yes.
Zach Schwank,
Yes.
David Shapiro,
Shapiro,
Shapiro.
yes. Shapiro,
thank you
yes.
so
Thank
much. Jose Luis Solache,
Yes.
Hilda Solis, Karen Spiegel,
Yes.
Steve Ty,
Yes.
Benjamin Vasquez, Donald Wagner, Alan Wapner,
Yes.
Frank Yokoyama.
Yes.
Madam President, the motion for item 1, 2, and the consent calendar passes with 41 votes yes, 0 votes no, and 0 abstentions.
Great, thank you so much. We will now move to our reports, and we'll start with Regional Council Member Lucy. What? Oh, yeah, that's what I meant to do. Do we have any public comments on the remaining reports?
Do not see any raised hands.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Lucy Dunn
Thank
for
you.
our business report.
Thank you, Madam President. In the interest of time, a couple of quick things, and I'll put my report into writing for links and things for folks on some of the things that I mentioned. I wanted to bring to your attention And in fact, Governor Gavin Newsom issued a press release on the 27th that he intends to institute fixes for this, but basically that a group of ostensibly white homeowners in Berkeley have decided that adding new students to UC Berkeley is an environmental impact because of quote unquote speculative parties that they might have in a new housing development built on a dilapidated piece of land that it also includes housing for homeless. Interesting sidebar is we talked about this case with Chair Randolph from CARB. She was furious about it because she lives near there and that park is a mess and she wanted the housing herself. So it called for a good conversation on CEQA modernization. And one of the things I loved was hearing that I know your business community supports, that SCAG intends to go up in April with a delegation to talk about doing legislative reforms. I would just urge that you don't ask for another study session on it, but actually propose reforms because it's been studied to death. And there's three things that the business community really knows would make a difference. It doesn't fix the problem, but three fixes. Number one, no more anonymous lawsuits, no more friends of the garter. If you're going to file a lawsuit, put your name on it. Number two, one and done. So no more serial lawsuits. There's one project, net zero project in the housing. The housing project, they even give you an electric car to go with the housing, right? 25 lawsuits to get that thing done. So one and done lawsuit, no serial lawsuits. And the last, and this is probably the hardest, but it's most important, for environmental impacts, for the impacts that have been determined under CEQA, mitigation is the only remedy. Additional mitigation is the only remedy. Translation, and that's why this is hard, that doesn't mean you can leverage another project labor agreement, right? We had one of our leaders in our meeting with Chair Randolph said to us that CEQA has become such a scam in California that literally home builders have been sued by people in Arizona for housing projects in California, knowing that just to make them go away, they'll write a check. So I would just share with you, please, in your power as half the population of the state of California, more than half the state's budget, let's use that power and your business community will be there to support those legislative fixes. So it's kind of important issue that transcended as well into that conversation with Ms. Randolph. And we educated her on housing too, that even with the housing goals, the business community asked straight out question to the chair and said, you know, our perception is that the administration, they don't talk to each other. You know, you'll come up with these rules and regulations for housing, but you don't understand there's 49 other Newsom administration regulatory agencies that also have added regulations and fees. In the 4 years Gavin Newsom has been governor, $110,000 per home fees have been added in just 4 years. And so no one's talking to each other. And we just asked the chair directly, are you seeing that as well? Do you see the coordination and the silo? And her comment was interesting because she worked under both the Brown administration as well as Newsom. And she said Brown had a very small staff. And so everybody knew everything that was going on. And Gavin's staff is much larger. And so, yes, indeed, she agreed. She didn't see the coordination there as well as could be. And so we encouraged her to, again, you cannot be successful on your climate change goals, Madam Chair, unless you are also aligned with housing goals. And as we are moving on our housing goals in the state, our cities are very cranky with the rules coming out of Sacramento. We just made this clear, right? I said, we get it. And they want to be able to control their destiny. But the reality is what's coming out of Sacramento is not aligned, housing and climate change. So she took it all. She was very accessible. ask good questions, and we said your business community is going to support your efforts. But I wanted to share that with you because it was a good intersection between Sacramento and the stuff that every one of you deal with at the local level, trying to implement some of these things, and certainly for regional planning. Randall Lewis asked me to share with you that on the for sale housing side for new homes, it looks pretty strong in Southern California right now, especially in the Inland Empire, new home sales. The overall supply in Southern California of home prices, the overall supply is continue to constrained. And yet, because of that economy, the recession likely, the cost of living going up, actually home prices are coming down. So keep an eye on that one. Randall made an interesting point that we talked about a little earlier. He said, we continue to see an exit of people from California to markets where the cost of housing is lower. And since January, they've lost at least 5 employees who have announced that they're leaving California to go to places like Texas and Tennessee so that they can buy a home in the next few years. It's not headline news, but he says it's accelerating. And particularly with folks retiring, upper level employees with strong incomes and pretty good wealth, and all of their tax dollars are leaving the state as well to go find places that are less expensive to live. So I raise that with you just to keep an eye on that within our SCAG region. I notice our population numbers are, the growth isn't there that we thought it was going to be. So kind of interesting comments. To that point, this is an interesting item from the business community that they wanted me to share. Strong business community support. Actually, we think strong public support for a ballot measure that has just qualified for November 2024. It's called the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, headed for the November ballot. You can find it under taxpayerprotection.com. It requires the state legislature imposing new or higher taxes, not existing, to be approved by a majority of voters. For you, all local officials, it reinstates the 2/3 approval for new or higher special taxes proposed by initiative in a local election while maintaining current majority vote for general tax increases. It requires transparency in what the taxes are for, no changes to current spending or revenue. I share this with you because the business community is strongly supportive of this, and the League of Cities, in fairness, this is a strong oppose. So keep an eye on this one. More information will come out, and I'll put all these links in my little report for you to follow up on. But when you've got, even like last year, there were $200 billion of new tax increases that were discussed in Sacramento. It obviously didn't get passed. And we're facing a budget deficit this year. Business is looking at this very, very closely as costs of living are tough for our folks right now. And we suspect that a lot of cities are going to have struggled with local budgets and balancing their budgets as well. So word to the wise, we need to work together on this one, knowing that there may be some opposing views, but I think that's a lot of good information. That's news you can use. And last but not least, on April the 3rd, for our newbies, the GLUE Council is the Global Land Use and Economics Council of business representatives that help to advise SCAG, help to inform, connect SoCal. And then what you will see when they do that and we talk to each other, they end up supporting the plan at the end of the day. They have historically. So it's good to have your business leaders help you support the hard efforts that are going here. We're going to do an update on Connect SoCal, the forecast data on April the 3rd. Talk about small business, especially al fresco dining rules, and the impact, post-pandemic rules about keeping those on your streets, what's happening with that, and a little bit of discussion on builder's remedy coming from the building industry. Of course, anyone is invited. It's a Zoom meeting, and I think it's still a Zoom meeting. And I'd love to have you and attend. We love your comments and questions. So that's it for me, Madam President. Happy to
take any questions.
Thank you, Lucy Dunn. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to my report. And first, I want to thank, during this transition from all Zoom to hybrid and everything we're going through, I just want to thank Maggie Aguilar and her team for everything they've done. This has not been easy. She's got to watch everything going on. You know, we didn't just transition, we added a whole lot of new rules to this. So Maggie has been very agile in responding to them and making the most of a very difficult situation. So thank you. I also would like to take this time to welcome the following new regional council members, and that's Lauren Meister, West Hollywood, RC41, thank you. And Trish Kelly, who is our TCA representative as well. So welcome. And we did have a new member orientation last week, and it was the team at SCAG did a great job of bringing the information to our new members so that they can feel confident and comfortable in participating in everything that SCAG does, which, as we all know, is a lot. So I just want to speak quickly on our state legislative agenda that you heard Lucy referred to quickly, and in the Legislative Communications and Membership Committee met, and under the very adept and strategic leadership of Jose Luis Salache, they determined what their legislative priorities would be, and they are protecting transportation budget priorities that the governor proposed cutting in his January budget, communicating our region's housing progress, especially with all the good work we're doing with the REAP funds. It seems like they're not hearing how much we're doing down here, and they need to know. Recognizing the important role that regions play in helping the state achieve our shared climate goals. And once more, back to Lucy, asking the legislature to establish a statewide task force to evaluate comprehensive modernization to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. I do want to invite everybody May 4th and 5th to our General Assembly in the JW Marriott Desert Springs Resort and Spa. It's always great. There's a lot of information. Please go to scag.ca.gov/GA 2023 to get more information and to register. It's always a great event. And then we are having a mobile workshop on March 10th, so next week in Palm Desert. And I hope many of you can join us. We will be going and looking at hydrogen fuel cell facility and talking about a lot of the Go Human projects, active transportation project. And if you'd like to join us, please contact David Salgado at salgado@scag.ca.gov. And our next regional council meeting is April 6, 2023 at 12 p.m. And I'll turn it over to Comey.
Thank you, Madam President. Real quickly, I have two items. One is just an update on the Regional Advanced Mitigation Planning policy framework that was adopted by the Regional Council last week. Next steps is for us to establish the Technical Advisory Committee to develop the Green Print tool. That should be convened in the spring. We're currently recruiting for TAC members from our representative agencies, the local jurisdictions, county transportation commissions, Caltrans, and the environmental and business community. So we're going through right now, sending letters to organizations and agencies to ask for their nominations. We're also working through our various advisory groups to get the word out. And subsequently, SCAG staff will initiate a procurement process, a competitive procurement process to bring a consultant on board to help develop the tool with the TAC. The tool, once developed, will be presented to the Energy and Environment Committee, EEC, and the Regional Council for their final review and approval. And then secondly and lastly, I also want to bring to your attention that the Regional Council approved today the REAP PATH program. And this is a housing program. The application will be live, and the PATH program is intended. It's one of the three major funding programs in REAP 2.0 that Cindy talked about in the budget. The program guidelines appear on page 78 of the agenda, and it's $88.8 million that's set aside in that program, and it supports actions that accelerate infill development to facilitate housing supply, choice, and affordability, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and also reducing vehicle miles traveled. All of those things I just mentioned are required objectives of the funding program from the state. The purpose of this program is to bring housing production to scale across the SCAG region. And so this is one of three funding opportunities that there are three funding opportunities that are included in the program. The first two, the notice of funding availability and housing infill on public and private lands programs. Those are expected to open in April. And following the approval that we're anticipating to get from the state on our REAP 2.0 application. The third opportunity would deal with utilities, regional utilities supporting housing programs. That will open in the summer. And I know I've said a lot of things there. We will continue to bring this back to your attention from time to time as we get close to things being actionable. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that we have $88 million in programming that's available to all of our jurisdictions to support housing production. That is the summary of that last item. That's my presentation, Madam President. We'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, are there any future agenda items? Yes, Oscar.
Could we get an update on the negotiations happening with the Colorado River water?
Is that us?
Not quite us, but we can find out and bring it back to you.
Or direct?
Yeah.
Direct him to who would do that. Okay, yes.
Madam President, if I just 2 seconds, I wanted to add to your report for 2 seconds, but you skipped to
take it
to your neighbor next door. I just want to highlight the president's comment about the legislative tour that we're doing in April. As a committee chair, we haven't had this opportunity for 3 years, literally this month, because we've been in pandemic status. So we're happy to go back to Sacramento and advocate for the different SCAG priorities. So I just want to highlight our president's message. And on behalf of the whole committee, we've done a lot of good work the last 2-3 years. So we're excited to physically go to Sacramento and make sure our voices are heard. And I just want to thank the entire committee and our vice chair. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Are there any other comments, questions?
Madam
Okay.
Chair, this is Elizabeth Becerra from the city of Victorville. Mr. Anise, do we bring it up about the Joshua Tree yet, or you're still working with our mayor on that?
Well, I was waiting. I was told to wait for a contact I hadn't seen because I don't have any detail on the issue, specific issue. So we'll take it up and pursue it. I think staff has been apprised of the situation, but I wasn't sure what the specific question is that we need to be asking the regulatory agencies, whether it's Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal level or Fish and Game at the state level. So if you have something very specific, I would appreciate you sending it to me. I was told to stand by.
I did, so I sent it to Maggie. If Maggie can forward it to you.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Yeah, she's
Thank you.
saying. Good. Thank you, sir. No other questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else in the room? And I see nothing online. So at that, no unfinished business. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.